Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this session, which is a webinar on balancing work and caring through COVID and beyond. This is going to be a really exciting webinar where we're going to have some really good speakers which are talking about this experience around balancing work and caring through COVID. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to have the panel, and then once the panel have introduced themselves, we're going to have some questions where we're going to ask each of the panel members to answer some of the questions which you've kindly brought in. The session will last for 1 hour, and there will be an opportunity for a discussion after they've spoken. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my first panelist, who is Lucy Burke, who is UCU NEC rep for disabled members. Welcome, Lucy. Lucy, you have 6 minutes to introduce yourself and say a few things about yourself.
Okay, so I'll say a few things about myself to start with. I work at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm research active, so I'm involved in quite a lot of sort of different research projects with all of the obligations that are tied to that. And obviously, I'm on the NEC representing disabled members, as you've just said. Outside of work, I've got 2 children, and my son, who's 19, has autism and a learning disability, and he has quite a high level of support sort of needs. So he has the highest level of personal independent payments, and he also accesses a personal budget. So alongside the work that I, my work, I also manage Danny's care. And I would say that as a family, we've been affected, like so many other families, by the failure of the government to plan for the needs of disabled people during the pandemic. So at the beginning of the lockdown period, I think what we found most difficult was a lack of information and a lack of guidance, and the kind of falling away of the sort of support that we'd had before and that we could draw upon. So in our area, all of the learning disability nurses who worked in the community were redeployed into hospital work. It was very difficult to get hold of sort of social workers. It was very difficult to get good advice about what was going to happen in relationship to personal assistance and so on. So there was quite a lot of uncertainty, and of course that's quite a stressful thing to deal with when you're also dealing with a full-time job. And I mean, I would say also, I mean, my other most sort of pervasive, I think, profound fear has been as well what would happen to my son if he were to be hospitalised in this period or to get COVID, because of course one of the other really disturbing elements of the pandemic is the reality that people with learning disabilities and autism haven't received the critical care and medical care that they've needed, and the high numbers of disabled people who have lost their lives. So a bunch of things that have been going on outside of work that make life difficult, plus then my son not being able to go to college, and me and a lot of the work of kind of keeping him engaged and educating him through this process falling on me, as it has done with lots of other parents. So there's been that, and then there's been what's happened at work. And I think what's happened at work, most people have found that whilst I think there's a kind of sympathy, or sympathy was extended, people would say things like, do your best. There was nothing tangible or practical or meaningful that went on to enable me to manage my obligations at work and my obligations as a carer. And so I think the most pressing issue for people in my position, and for any parent really in this time, has been this kind of sort of time poverty, not having enough time to do all the things that you're required to do, that adding to sort of stress and feeling that tasks mount up, working really unsustainable hours, and essentially doing two jobs, two important jobs, one of which is essentially kind of invisible as far as our formal workplace is concerned. So I think it's been really, really tough, and I think it's really really kind of exposed the need for workplaces to have better mechanisms in place to meet the needs of carers and to enable them to do their jobs and to contribute in a way that doesn't lead to impossible workloads and all of the kind of negative consequences of that. Yeah, so that's me.
Lucy, that's really great. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Mubin Bhutta. Hi, Mubin, who is the Head of Policy and Influencing and Working Families. So Mubin, I'm going to give you 6 minutes, and I look forward to listening to you.
Mubin, I think you might be on mute at the moment.
So sorry. I'll start again. Sorry, I was on mute. I was just saying it was really interesting to hear Lucy's experience, which I think really resonates with some things we've been hearing. So Working Families is the UK's work-life balance charity, and our mission is to remove the barriers in the workplace for people with caring responsibilities. We're unique in that we work directly with parents and carers. We provide free legal advice to parents and carers facing issues at work, but we also work directly with employers on creating flexible and family-friendly workplaces. So we kind of see both sides of the coin, as it were. And within our membership, we do have several universities, several higher education institutions within our membership as well. What I wanted to talk about very briefly is just some of the things that we've been hearing from parents over the last 6 months. It's been incredibly challenging for families up and down the country, which I'm sure I don't need to tell you. The pandemic has had an extraordinary effect on the way that we work, with 49% of people working from home, 1 in 7 people affected by childcare closures. We saw an immediate 6-fold increase in demand for our legal advice service almost overnight. Had 500,000 people visit our website. One of the key things that we called for was for employees to be able to be furloughed for childcare reasons. And while we're really pleased to see the government take this measure up, we are concerned that one of the consequences of that is that women will be paying a higher economic price for the pandemic. Mothers have been disproportionately furloughed for childcare. We're concerned that they might be the first in line for redundancy because they've been less visible in the workplace. They've been shouldering caring burden, and women are also overrepresented in the worst economically affected sectors. We've also seen evidence of harsher pregnancy and maternity discrimination, with pregnant women having to resort to sick pay rather than the full pay that they're entitled to. On a more positive note, I don't think anybody who's lived through this, me included, would advocate working from home while trying to homeschool, while trying to do with childcare challenges. And it's an enforced experiment that we've all lived through. But what it has demonstrated is that flexibility is available in many, many more jobs than were previously advertised or offered on this basis. There's an opportunity to kind of open up that bottleneck of flexible jobs. We surveyed 1,000 parents this summer, and more than 9 out of 10 of them told us that they wanted to retain flexibility post-COVID. We found that half of women had made changes to their working patterns to accommodate caring responsibilities, compared to 1/3 of fathers. And more than 2/3 of parents and carers said they'd like their future arrangements to be very flexible, and half plan to make changes, but more than 1 in 10 didn't think they'd be able to get this flexibility. So there's still this kind of cultural barriers that need to be tackled. We've seen some outstanding practice from employers, allowing parents to take leave on full pay, flexibility around hours, around performance, openness about seeing children popping up on video calls, lots of examples of good practice as well. In terms of what we'd like to see going forward, just very briefly, the government committed in December, before all of this, to creating a labour market that's flexible by default. So we'd like to see those measures now brought forward, but for that flexibility to be meaningful, with jobs advertised as flexible from the outset. So, we've had, again, an extreme example of trying to cram in our jobs around other things. Actually, it'd be better to actually design jobs as flexible so they actually fit in the hours that are allocated to them, rather than making changes after the fact. And there's reports that some vacancies are now attracting 2,000 applicants. If you've got caring responsibilities and you require flexibility, it's almost impossible to compete unless there's flexibility at the point of hire. We're also interested in strengthening access to employment rights for parents and carers in insecure work who don't have the same access. And we'd like to see caring enshrined as a protected characteristic to enable, to strengthen the rights that parents and carers have in the workplace, in the same way that there are protections for pregnancy and maternity. I'm gonna stop there, I think, and hand back over.
Thank you very much, Mabine. That's really sent some thought, definitely what we can think about. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, which is Natasha Ususu. I think that's how you pronounce it, but I'm sure she'll say it directly to me. Natasha, welcome. Natasha is a Policy and Campaigns Officer for TUC. So, Natasha, you have 6 minutes like the rest, and then we'll move on to the questions after that. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, so my name is Natasha Owusu. I'm TUC, working at the TUC for quite a few years now. I'm the Policy Campaign Support Officer in the Equalities Department. I lead on areas such as carers leave and also flexible working as well. Today, I'm just briefly going to talk through our BIS consultation response to the carers leave consultation that the government introduced earlier on this year. And what we are calling for is, in this policy, is 10 days paid carers leave for all workers from their first day in the job. The proposal that the government put forward is unpaid carers leave for employees, and we believe carers leave should be paid and a day one right. So I'll briefly talk you through a summary of our consultation response and what we found and the work TUC are doing on during the pandemic, we have seen a massive increase in the number of unpaid carers. The government's proposal to give carers unpaid leave does not deliver on the support and the unpaid working carers that the unpaid working carers really need. And the government's approach will only benefit a few unpaid carers, that is. And so what is the current climate like? During the pandemic, 4.5 million people have started providing unpaid care, with 2.8 million of these in employment having to struggle to juggle work and unpaid care. This has represented nearly a 50% increase in the number of unpaid carers since the pandemic. 19.6 million, the majority of whom are women. In total, more than 1 in 4 of all workers are combining work and unpaid care, with a number of workers worried they might have to reduce their paid working hours, leave work, or stop studying as a result of their caring role, and now making up the majority of those who have lost jobs or hours at work. So why have we seen a rise in carers? Well, firstly, for working mums, a recent TUC research highlighted that around 2 in 5 working mums with children under the age of 10 can't get enough childcare to cover the hours they need for work. Working mums are worried about the impact of balancing work and childcare, and this has affected how they will be assessed, and they're worried about how this will affect how they will be assessed by their employer, and also their chances of promotion. This is what they told the TUC. These workers are forced to work without many of the most basic employment protections. The stress and uncertainty created by unpredictability of insecure work blights the lives of working workers in ordinary times. But the COVID-19 pandemic has added a more deadly aspect to this lack of workplace power. Many women in key roles such as caring, in retail, cleaning or education are on insecure work. The insecure contracts make it harder for them to not only assert their rights for a safe workplace and appropriate PPE, but also to take time off for caring responsibilities. And women are more likely to be employed on insecure and 0-hours contracts than men, particularly BME and migrant women, and to be working part-time. They miss out on working parents and carers' rights, such as flexible working, unpaid parental leave, and time off for dependents. We've also seen, and it's been well documented, and colleagues have touched on this in regards to the problems in social care. Social care in England has insufficient funding to meet demand, and this is forcing councils to tighten eligibility and for people to have to rely on informal care. But unfortunately, the lack of inaction is falling heavily on those who rely on the care system, which includes a growing reliance on unpaid, which puts more pressure on unpaid carers. So the challenges carers face in the workplace due to the lack of nursery places and social services available to them in their areas, either having to shut down or reduce the services they are able to provide. This has impacted on older women who have had to fill the gap for their loved ones. And also, as well as caring for their parents and grandparents, older women often provide childcare for their grandchildren. The pressure to work enough hours to make a living and support family, together with the pressure to be available to care for a loved one, can be a lot. A union has told us that many workers care for a parent or a parent-in-law or someone elderly. A recent survey by the Civil Service Union found that that we've had sight of has found that 9% of respondents provide emotional support. And also members provide practical support, as well as help with support to help with paperwork or financial matters. And unions have reported that there are workers who provide elder care, which is caring for an aging relative or friend who cannot manage without support during this time. Briefly, just to conclude on we're calling for 10 days paid carers leave, and for it to be a day one right for all workers. And we believe that unions can provide support to carers by negotiating specific carers policy within the workplace, ideally including paid leave for carers and improve flexible working rights. This will raise the profile of many workers balancing ongoing caring responsibilities and work as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natasha. So I'm going to invite everybody else back on screen, and we're going to do questions to each of the panel members. So thank you so much for your presentations to start with. So I'm going to direct the first question to Natasha. Sorry, Natasha, I know that you've just spoken, which is what is reasonable to expect from management regarding the necessary adjustments for those with caring responsibilities during COVID-19? For example, for children sent home to isolate elderly / shielding parents. Natasha, if you'd like to have a go at that one, please. Okay.
So make sure. Yeah. So for employers, people working, that is for working, and working.
Okay. I think Natasha's having some issues.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Natasha. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Hi. Okay. So what employers can do is to promote carers leave, paid carers leave, also working, consulting with trade unions, working together with trade unions to negotiate on a policy around paid carers leave, also paid parental leave as well. Employers can work with trade unions, and also promoting flexible working, positive apart from home working, such as self-rostering, compressed hours, job sharing, making staff and workers aware, putting those policies up on their website, on their internal website, and promoting it amongst staff as well through their internal communication.
All right, thank you, Natasha. That's very helpful. Sorry to say that Natasha's internet connection is playing up slightly. Mabine, could you actually continue with that question? Is there anything else you'd like to add to what Natasha said?
I think there's some great suggestions from Natasha there. I think sort of what we've been, kind of trying to say is that kind of back to school doesn't mean back to how things were before March. Employers really need to be kind of, conscious of the pandemic is far from over. These sorts of things are going to continue to happen for the foreseeable future. So it really is about that kind of flexible sort of grown-up relationship with managers. But there's some measures, I think the flexible furlough scheme, which is available until the end of October, and then the successor to that, the job support scheme, I think there might be opportunities there for parents and carers to perhaps reduce their hours without obviously having some drop in income, but not as drastic as it would be, which might help them to manage, sort of a difficult period if they need to go back to homeschooling or caring for older relatives.
All right, thank you very much, Mabine. That's great. Lucy, I know you want to add something.
I think one of the challenges is how all of these ideas work in for instance, in higher education context. Because I think one of the challenges that people in my position face in universities is that there's a kind of ever expanding number of things that we can do. So you're involved in longer or shorter research projects, and there's never a clear sense of what achieving particular sort of goals might look like. So it's very competitive, and it's about how much you produce and being able to be involved in bids and being able to be involved in kind of networking and writing and thinking and doing all those kinds of things. So I think all of those arguments about flexibility are really important. But I think a lot of people feel that even if they have a few days or extra days for caring responsibilities, or if they have a bit more flexibility, they still feel that they're not kind of being able to develop their careers in an academic context, because you're facing a kind of culture that's based around a kind of ableist assumption of someone without any dependence and without any caring responsibilities, and it's quite tough. So I think what we need to be asking for is time, I think, and time to do the things that will enable us to meet meet whatever aspiration we might have in our workplaces. People might want different things, but I think having time, not just flexibility, is really important. Having a kind of adjustment to the kinds of things we're asked to do in order to be able to support us is hugely important. Because I think what people feel is, if for instance, you go on holiday as an academic and you just feel you're just coming back to the same amount of work and more. You don't feel that you're actually having a break in it, and it's not really any respite. So there's something about the culture as well particularly in universities, that I think we need to factor into how we think about, you know, care in the context of our union.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I'm going to also introduce our other colleague as well, which is Pura. Here she is, who is the chair of the Women's Standing Committee. So welcome, Pura. We're just in the process of just answering some questions, and we're just going to go through them. So would you like to say a couple of words about yourself before I move on?
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yes.
All right, thanks. Hi, Victoria, Lucy, Natasha, Mubin, and I've only got R. Spencer for the interpreter. Thanks very much for this webinar. I'm a bit working from home is sometimes a bit difficult to keep up at times. Look, in the Women Members Standing Committee, we're acutely aware of the disproportionate effect on women members that there is over the crisis, the current crisis, the COVID crisis, and there are aspects to do with the illness itself, which are important. And there are also aspects, and I haven't heard what's gone on before for various reasons, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but there are aspects which are about workload and how workload is managed. And there are aspects about university management and how that's managed as well. And we, you know, talk increasingly about an atmosphere of intimidation and compliance, which is always difficult and disproportionately affects women members. I think that from the Women Members Standing Committee, one of the things that we're very concerned about is an implication that the academic staff and non-academic staff can just be slid over into working from home as if that's just an extension of what you're already doing. And I think that one of the things that we've been concerned about is that, you know, working from home is not, needs to be negotiated. It needs to be negotiated. There needs to be an agreement on it. There needs to be clear parameters, and those clear parameters need to be negotiated in good faith with the trade union. And one of the aspects of that has got to be looking at workload for those who have significant caring responsibilities. We can't go back to the situation that we had over the summer, where schools were closed, where nurseries were closed, where children were at home, where other caring environments for adults who require caring environments were closed, and the burden came back onto women, and there was no respite from workload. And we were talking that just as there is a concept within the equality legislation of reasonable adjustments usually exists within the sphere. Well, it usually exists within the sphere of disability legislation, but not exclusively. And we need to think about how we would broker reasonable adjustments for those who have caring responsibilities when working from home, if the crisis deepens again. And that needs to include, and carers are primarily women, not exclusively, but disproportionately in every measurement that's ever done of it. Thanks very much. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you, Phil. That's really great. And I'm sure we'll hear from you again soon. So I'm going to move on to the next question, but can I just remind participants who are watching this that if they have any questions they'd like to provide, please do put them on the chat, and we will do our best to ensure that we include some of those questions as well, because this is live and we want you to be part of this discussion, which is the webinar on balancing work and caring through COVID and beyond. I'm going to go on to the next question, and I'm going to actually ask this question to Lucy to start with. Lucy, I'm going to say, what can be done to liberate the impact on careers we having had no time for research/career development during the past 6 months due to increased teaching related activities, unexpected caring and homeschooling? These new demands are likely to continue for the next months. What preventative activities can be put in place to minimize disadvantage? Now, I know that's a long kind of question and comment, so if you could have a go at that, I'd really appreciate that.
Thanks. I think it's a really good question. We know that women academics in particular have not been submitting articles to journals in anything like the same a kind of volume as prior to the pandemic. So we know, and there is evidence that this is affecting women's research careers. I think that, I mean, I spoke a little bit before about the issue around time, and having time and time poverty. And I think time poverty is a major issue for carers. And I think for people in academic jobs, often, you know, there's an assumption that people can write during weekends, in vacations. Now, if you're somebody like me and you have someone, you know, you care for outside of particular hours, that all those things are impossible in the first place. They were impossible before COVID. You have to either work every single hour there is to be able to get something out, or learn to be incredibly disciplined, or learn to modify, and this is the worst part, modify what you imagine you can do. Now, in terms of COVID, this is affecting a lot more people, and it's really exposed those kind of inequalities and the way that works and plays out in workplaces. I think universities need a long-term plan. So I think there has to be planning that takes on board the impact of this on carers, on parents, on women in particular. I think that plan has got to involve thinking very carefully about workload management. At the moment, we have massive intensification of workload. So people telling me at work that they are kind of crying because they're so tired, are working all hours, can't manage, or at the edge of their capacity. This is people who aren't carers as well, you know, and so what you need is a realistic sense of workload, and realistic ideas of what achievement looks like and what objectives should be. So, you know, there's a kind of absolute race to produce research-wise, but that's not feasible, and people shouldn't be negatively impacted upon by that. Academic institutions are often not good actually at responding in a meaningful way to things like the Equality Act and the Code of Practice, in terms of you know, how you might view someone's performance and someone's kind of research record in terms of promotion. So I think there needs to be a coherent and consistent approach to that, and a long-term plan to ensure that women in particular, and carers more generally, are given the time they need to re-engage with research, and that has to be sort of played out in terms of you know, research planning, in terms of you know, personal development, reviewing, in terms of the objectives people are set.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Lucy. I wondered, Fiona, whether you've got another response to add to that briefly. You're on mute.
Right, okay then, that's brilliant, thanks. No, I mean, obviously, you know, I think that what Lucy said is really helpful, and I think that this, in some ways, the current crisis that we're facing has served to give us more clarity over the issues that we're facing anyway, with the issues of research and the issues of REF. So UCU has an opposition to REF anyway, and it was largely based on gender-based discriminatory practice within REF, and particularly over the issues of maternity. Of maternity absences, and that's why UCU did take a principled position. I think we're sort of discussing it again now, and I think that in a lot of ways this makes it more acute, doesn't it? You know, what sort of research framework, what sort of research practice would we like to see in HE? And I think this is a good moment for UCU to be sharpening its position around that, and sharpening and, you know, rediscussing the ideas around that. I mean, in terms of practicalities, yes, every research project will automatically have its deadline extended. There isn't any reason why not to do that. Every research you know, deadline that there is for research projects, etc., should immediately be reviewed. Obviously, that encompasses not just women's staff, but the other thing is that, you know, again, on all of these things, you know, like workload, we have a raft of casualised staff who are desperate to maintain their employment at universities. We need them more than ever. So it's a full picture there, isn't it? Universities have the wherewithal to make improvements. They're not even particularly difficult to enact, and so there are some practical steps there which which we need to be pressurizing universities to bring about.
Thank you, Pura. That's really helpful. Now, I'm going to do something a bit more sneaky, I think, to do as chair. I want to also ask something else, which links to these two questions we've just had, and also open up the other three questions, which I've got to ask as well as the others come through. I wanted to know whether there is a difference for when we look at BME and carers. If so, what would that look? What is that? What is that? What's actually going on? What does that look like? So we're talking about carers here, the balancing of work and caring. And I wondered, through COVID and beyond, and I wondered if there's a difference from workers which are from BME backgrounds, which are also carers. And I wonder what that looks like. If anybody wants to just try and have a go at answering that question at all. Okay, let me leave that, and I'm going to come back to it. But I just wanted to just put that there because I think it's a really important question as we think about what's happening with balancing work and caring through COVID and beyond, to look at it in an intersectional way as well. Okay, I will come back to that. What extra financial support is available for carers is question number 3. So I'm going to ask Mabine if she can start off with that question, and then I'm going to get others to come into that one as well.
Thank you. I'm always a bit wary of getting too much into this because I'm not a benefits advisor. So all I'm going to say really is that our website, workingfamilies.org.uk, has got an awful lot of information about social security and the sorts of different routes that might be available. I'm also conscious that benefits interact with each other, so I wouldn't want to suggest a particular route because it might actually leave someone worse off. So that would be my suggestion, is to just have a look at our website or at kind of other advice providers out there as well.
Natasha, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay, all right. So I know that Natasha is having issues with her internet server, so I'm going to move on to the next question.
Can you hear me?
So if we look at the next question, some rules allow for social distancing only if people can work very late shifts. Should parents be prioritized in the workplace over workers without children? Really interesting question there. So can I start with, I'd like to start with Natasha, but are you okay, Natasha? Are you back on? Okay, let's start with Mabine.
Okay, thanks. I think we would hope that employers would be understanding about this, particularly, I've got school-age children. There's all sorts of things happening with staggered pickups and drop-offs and lack of wraparound care, still question marks over informal childcare. So all those constraints are still in place for working parents and carers. Again, we've got advice on our website about imposed changes of hours and the sorts of actions that parents and carers can take to challenge this if that is happening to them. The only other thing I would add is that in the guidance for employers about reopening workplaces, the government did say that employers shouldn't discriminate against people with caring responsibilities. But I would caveat that by saying it's very unclear what that actually means and how it could be enforced. But I'd certainly be interested in any examples if anyone has used it. But that's just another thing that has been recognised.
Lucy, would you like to say anything on that one?
Well, I suppose just to reiterate what Mabine's just said, that you would really hope that a good employer would accord flexibility, and I think that might mean not assuming when what times work for people as well. Do you know what I mean? I think there has to be a process where you actively engage with people and try and meet that need, because I don't know what some employers think, but you can't not have the person you care for. Then you can't materialize them away. You have to take a child to school, that's what you have to do. If you have to pick them up, that's what you have to do. It's and there isn't enough support around that to enable people to do anything different. So yes, I think that I think people with caring needs, I think parents should be prioritised if that's the thing that enables them to carry on working. And it just makes sense to me that that would be the case.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next question. So I want to try and get as many questions as we can in. So the next question which we've got at this present moment will be, so what to do when this is a really interesting question actually. What to do when the line manager asks me to do more when my workload is already overstretched and I'm a single parent with a young child? What do we do about that? What would you suggest? Pura, can I start with you first? And then I'll come around the table and see who else is there. You need to take
Is my mic on? I know that it comes on and off and everything.
Yeah,
what would you do if your line manager asks you to do more work? I want to say to people, say no, you can't do it. You're already overstretched, and they don't have the right just to dump more and more workload on you. But in the reality, I mean, I do think that, but as an individual standing up to something against your line manager is a very, very uncomfortable place to be. So I would hope that this is something, again, I think some of the issues, not all of them, but some of the issues that we're facing over COVID in some ways crystallizing the sorts of things that we need to be doing anyway. If your branch has a strong position over workload, if your branch has measured and done work to make sure that workload is a fair allocation, if it's sharp over things like the terribly manipulative changes that we have, then you as an individual can join a collective, which is what trade unions are about, aren't they? I mean, I often advise people to say no to line managers, but then I say also you can adhere to this is the position of the branch or this is the position of UCU. Thank you. I'm going to have to stop a minute. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to have to stop a minute. All right, Victoria, I'm going to come back to you later.
All right, thank you, Pura. So Natasha's added some comments, which is really helpful, actually, which is she just says, just want to say that employers are required to conduct risk assessments, and the law requires employers to consult with workers and unions at TUC. We are calling for employers to publish their risk assessments. So thank you, Natasha. That's really, really helpful. Lucy, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this in terms of sort of health and safety and stress, and the fact that this kind of, you know, piling more and more work on people is really damaging to your health. It's really damaging to people's kind of physical health and mental health. Is actually a massively counterproductive thing to do in terms of the likelihood that someone then might really burn out, not be able to carry on, be physically ill and be away. I think people need to understand their rights in relationship to health and safety, and I think they need to also understand protections around equality in the Equality Act. But I think it's really hard, as Pura was saying, for individuals to do that. And so I think that's where unions can help and can step in and can support people. But, you know, I think if you can't manage, then it's really important to be able to say that as well. Massively important. I just think in reality, employers tend not to be brilliant at stress risk assessments, for instance, and tend not to be brilliant at understanding workloads and health and safety. And I think that's one of the jobs of the union, to really sort of bring that to the fore and make it clear that workload is a health and safety issue. It's and an equality issue as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got some more points on the chat here. So some of the issues which BME carers would face is that they may be providing caring from a distance, i.e. abroad, and unable to travel at the drop of a hat. Those things are really, really important to understand. So also, Natasha says BME carers are more likely to care for family members and friends when they are less likely to access support, such as financial. These are also acute aspects, and also go into, as we asked here, the question, which is what do you do when your line manager asks you? Well, they could also be, because of disproportionate numbers of BME members of staff are on precarious contracts, asking for their workload, which is already overstretched, is going to be a bit of an issue, because they could find themselves first out the door. So those things as well to look at when it comes to issues around discrimination. we're going to now move on to the next question, which we're going to be asking. And so which one this one is what is the best way to let your employer know that you are now caring for an elderly and you're a shielding parent? What is the best approach to take when you do not want to appear as though you are not coping? This is a really reality question which many people will find themselves asking. So I'm going to ask Mubin to start with, and then I'm going to move on to Lucy, and then hopefully Natasha may put something on the chat so I can bring her into the discussion as well. Okay.
Thanks, Victoria. I think this is slightly kind of sad-making question. If you feel that you're not able to tell your employer or your line manager, I would really hope that you'd be able to have that open, honest conversation, sort of bring yourself to work, because we're all, we've all got a life outside work, not just parents, not just carers. People have got issues with their dogs or their friends. All sorts of things are happening outside of work, and in some ways, the pandemic has, in some ways, kind of helped to kind of tear down that false wall between home and family life. We've kind of seen them clashing a bit more. I would suggest that you might want to think about what it is that you need from your employer. So if you need more flexibility, don't forget that you have the formal right to request flexible working. You can also take emergency time off for dependents. So just have a think about what your actual rights are. It depends on the situation, but I would hope that what's preferable is to come to sort of an understanding and be able to kind of be more ad hoc and have an ongoing relationship with your line manager.
Thank you very much. Lucy.
This is a really sad question, and it's sad for a number of reasons, and one of them is that idea, and I think it's really prevalent, particularly I see it in higher education, that the idea that you're a human being who loves other people and cares for them and is worried about them, or is taking on a lot of work because of that, or the idea that you're a disabled person, for instance, and you may have additional needs. That idea that somehow that's a deficit and that's something that you need to cover up and not reveal. I think that says everything about the brutality of the kind of culture we're in, that people feel that all of those things are things to be hidden, and and I think we really need to work towards a culture where that's not the case, and where we don't have to think about those things in those terms. But so I suppose I wouldn't want someone to feel that if they weren't coping that they couldn't say so. I think if you can't say so, then further down the line you become ill and unwell and unable to manage at all. And so I think it is important that people can speak about these things. But I think that what I've seen sort of through the kind of planning of return to on-site and campus is people absolutely fearing for their parents. If they're caring for older people, and particularly sort of people with dementia or significant caring needs, they are so anxious about what it means to then be forced to return to on-site face-to-face teaching. And I think different employers have dealt with this differently in terms of making provision for people in that group. And you would hope that our employers would take that on board when they're thinking about what it means and what they're asking staff to do. But I know that different universities are doing this in different ways. But I think people should just tell their employers. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. That's really helpful. And Natasha says here as well, carers should talk to their reps for support, to be honest and direct. So that's supporting what you've just said, Lucy, as well. And also the institution has a duty to promote equality. That is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, do you have any advice for students who are balancing care and responsibilities alongside their studies? Students with children may struggle to complete their studies on time without support. Now, we all know, people sitting around this table at the moment, we all know that is an ongoing question which many students have to deal with. Pure, I'm going to start with you first of all, then I'm going to do Lucy and see what Natasha says, and then Mubin. Okay, Pure.
Well, thanks very much. Sorry about the difficulties there. Again, I mean, we don't represent students, but it's keenly important to us. And like I was saying before, the institution has a duty to promote equality. And what promoting equality means is that you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach, but there are different circumstances for people if they have different personal circumstances or if they have different circumstances. So my advice to students, I suppose, is to visit your student support, student hub or student union. I actually have a sneaking feeling that sometimes university managements can be more understanding of students' situations than they can be of staff situations for a variety of reasons, which are awkward, I think. I mean, the idea of treating students as customers, I completely disagree with, but somehow that sort of sometimes seems to be mixed into the balance here. We've had situations, again, not because of COVID, but because for other circumstances. And I've always argued that deadlines, etc., have to be set on an individual basis where there's a requirement for it. So I would certainly say to the student, you need to talk about it. It's not a sign of weakness to say that you're trying to do two jobs. We used to call it the woman's double shift, didn't we? You work all day in the workplace and then you go home and you do a second shift at home. It's to be honest, it's a source of pride that you're able to keep all those things going. So it's important to talk to people and to be open about it, and to make sure that you get, what are your rights under legislation, and your rights and in natural justice as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pura. Who was I saying next? Did I say you next, Lucy? I can't remember. Or did I say yes, Lucy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I agree with what Pura has said. I want to say to everybody, be kind and generous to yourself. I think people punish themselves for things that aren't of their making, and ask for support and extensions when you need it. Really what Pura said, but all of that. I think, people need. I don't think anybody should feel they have to be superhuman, actually, and I would hope that universities will be kind to students in this situation and give them the time that they need.
Okay, thank you. And Natasha, thank you. Reps can play a key role again. Reps raise awareness of carers' need, map out who are carers in the workplace, conduct an anonymous survey to gather experience, and let members know what support is available. That's really important as well. And we've got time for one more question, which is, do you have any suggestions for how permanent members of staff can leverage their security to protect casualised staff who are under the lots more pressure to come onto campus and teach seminars, even if they have care commitments or children who have been sent home to isolate or children themselves? Wow, this is a big one, and it's current at the present moment. So let me think who I'd like to ask first. I think I'm going to ask Lucy, and then I'm going to ask Pura, and then I'm going to see whether Mubin or Natasha would like to add anything at all. So, Lucy, over to you to start with. We've only got a little bit of time, so I'll give you a minute and a half to answer this one if you can.
It's a big question. I think that the exploitation of people on insecure contracts is one of the biggest issues in our union, and that people who are on secure contracts ought to be the people who are speaking out and using that position to speak out about it, because I think it's often difficult for people on insecure contracts to feel that they've got a voice, or that they can, or that they're safe to say what's happening. So I think we have an absolute obligation to make that one of the priority things that we talk about. And I do think that we ought to be arguing for equal protections and equal acknowledgement of risk for people who are on casual contracts, who are often picking up a lot of work, but I don't think are subject to the same sort of protections. And I think we've just got to make that a priority. I won't say any more because I think other people should have a chance as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to take a quick response from Pura, and then I'm going to go round and get everybody to say something to wrap up. Okay, Pura, you've got a minute and a bit just to say your response.
All right, thanks very much, Victor. Obviously, I support what Lucy has said, and I agree with what Lucy is saying. One of the things that we've done around this issue is to encourage casualised staff to talk to their colleagues and to let them know what's going on. Often we've found that the permanent staff didn't know what was going on. We've got one member of staff in my department, she's not the only one actually, who was telling everybody, look, I'm paid 2 grades below you for exactly the same work, and was telling everybody about it. And that created more of an atmosphere of support for that person, but also pressure on management to have a little look at why they're doing this to somebody, which is discriminatory. So just speaking out and speaking to colleagues is an important first step. But yes, at the end of the day, the fight over casualisation will be won because permanent staff are a key part of, it's not 2 separate things, it's things. So that's a bit generalised, I know.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to say thank you very much for all of you for taking part. I just want you now to I'm going to give you each a minute just to say a closing remark from yourselves before we close. So, Natasha, are you back online at all? Okay, so I'll let Natasha write something in the chat box. Mabine, can you say something as a closing remark for yourself? You've got a minute as that.
Thank you. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, really interesting to hear about people's experiences, very much chime with what we've heard up and down the country from parents. I think the pandemic has lifted the lid on all the things that are broken in our labour market, around insecure work, around flexible working, around gender equality. All these issues have been bubbling away in the social security system as well. And there's a real opportunity here that we're really keen to capitalise on to change the workplace. So not to have a retraction to try and get hurriedly back to exactly all the things that were broken before, but actually to take this opportunity to really push for change. And that's what we'll be doing along with UCU, TUC, and lots of other organisations we work with, particularly on flexible working.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lucy, can I have your closing remark, please?
All right, things I would really like to see. I think caring needs to be much more visible. I think we need to collect data and information about carers in our workplaces. I think we need to, I really agree that it should become a protected characteristic with the kind of rights associated with that. I think we must address time poverty in universities, and we must have reasonable expectations that allow people who are engaged in care to feel good about doing their job. And I think we need to value it. Caring isn't just a negative burden. I love my son, and he's changed my life in such an amazing way I can't even begin to say. And I don't want to have to talk about it as if it's always burdensome. I want to live in a world where it is valued and it matters. That's how, that's what I want to see.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. Pura.
Closing remarks. One of the things that is an unexpected result, I think, of COVID changes is that we're able to carry on with our trade union organisation, and we're able to carry on with our trade union campaigning and taking issues forward. So I might not have expected that. COVID is a trade union issue. Women and women's works and women's rights at work are trade union issues, and we are in a position to keep raising these and to fight on them where we need to. So it's important to remember that. I think that we're personally feel that we're unlikely to go back to the life that we had prior to the pandemic. I think there are going to be a lot of changes, and all of those changes, trade unions need to be at the heart of them. I think people look towards trade unions to be at the heart of them and to be there to secure people's rights, and it must be to secure women's rights as well. So just going to say that, and when you talk about the struggle and about winning better terms and conditions, trade unions have to be at the heart of it, and women are at the heart of trade unions. So that's important. We are spending a lot of time at home, but it's systems like this which make us realize that we're not alone, and that we are still able to organise collectively to identify areas which we need improvements, and put ourselves at the heart of fighting for those improvements so that they become a reality.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the time everybody's taken. Rebecca, I want to say thank you for your time and for doing the interpretation for our reading. And can I thank Pura and Lucy and Mabine and Natasha. I'm so sorry, Natasha, that you've had so many different issues with the internet. And thank you also for everybody back at stage who have also helped, which is Charlotte and Jenny, and also Sharon as well. And Jenny, did you want to come in very quickly just to say a couple of sentences as the head of equality?
Hi there. I'm very happy to thank you. I just really say thank you to all of our speakers today. I think that this is a hugely important area where many of our members have been acutely affected and will continue to be so in the coming months and years indeed. So I completely agree with what Pura has said, in that we need to find ways of continuing to organise and put the pressure onto employers to support our members in the way that they need, and indeed, beyond our own sectors, to organise with others on these issues of shared interest. So yeah, just a big thank you to everyone who's taken the time to take part today. Thanks to you, Victoria. And this is definitely something which we will be doing a lot more work on in the months and years to come. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, we now close the webinar.